So this is the scene right now near Coutts, Alberta, where large trucks and smaller vehicles have been parked on the highway since January 30th, blocking access to a border crossing with the United States. The RCMP are trying to encourage the protesters to move to a field, but so far no deal has been reached. It's estimated $44 million worth of goods goes through this crossing each day. Jason Kenney is the Premier of Alberta. He joins me now from Calgary. Premier, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
I'd like to start with that blockade if I could. You have a piece of legislation, the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, that was signed into law in May of 2020 to deal with situations just like this. Is it working, given what we're seeing right now at Coutts?
Well, it is a very useful tool for the police to use, and we have made this emphatically clear to the RCMP, the lead police agency, that it was purpose-built. That legislation was written for exactly this kind of circumstance. My understanding is they have only issued one ticket under the Defense of Critical Infrastructure Act to a gentleman who was found to be inciting a violation of the law. So there is that and a number of other legal instruments they have at their disposal: the Highway Safety Act, the rules of the road regulation, many other laws. Penalties that are available, and we expect our police service to enforce the law.
Okay, why do you think they're not enforcing the law? Is the situation just out of control? Is it too dangerous? Do you not have enough officers? I mean, why has this been allowed to go on for this long?
Those are all very fair questions, and the reality is that they're best put to the RCMP. We don't live in a country where politicians dictate tactical decisions by police. I've made it very clear on behalf of the government, and I believe the vast majority of the people of Alberta, that we expect law and order to be restored. I do understand that at the beginning of protests of this nature, the police have good reasons to often seek to avoid conflict and to de-escalate. That's understandable, and we respect those tactical and prudential judgments. But this has been going on for nearly 2 weeks. At various times, there has been a degree of compliance. I do think, let me just add some context. While I find the blockade intolerable and it must end, the truth is we have been able to keep traffic flowing largely unimpeded because we have 3 open ports of entry between Alberta and Montana. Mm-hmm. And we've been very focused as a government on that, which is, it's an inconvenience. And let me just say to the folks claiming to speak on behalf of truckers, there's 40 semi-truck operators at the Coutts border crossing, but we have 60,000 licensed truck drivers in Alberta, 300,000 licensed commercial vehicles. Every day, hundreds of long-haul semis going from Alberta to Montana and northbound as well. And basically all these folks are doing is inconveniencing those professional law-abiding truckers who simply want to make a living. And they're not stopping the border. They've made their point. I'm actually sympathetic with some of the points they've made, but that does not justify in any way, shape, or form this activity.
Well, Premier, you say we don't live in a country where politicians direct the actions of police, but we do live in a country where some politicians have been encouraging the actions of protesters. I mean, some of your federal conservative cousins have been posing and offering support to the people who have occupied the downtown core here in Ottawa, and you yourself tweeted support for the efforts to remove the federal vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers. I mean, do you feel the actions and words of politicians, including your support for some of the truckers' causes, has given them encouragement and maybe help prolong some of this?
Well, I'll speak to my own position. We've articulated our opposition to the federal vaccine mandate for transborder truckers long before these protests began, because it is not a defensible public health policy. We have tens of millions of people in North America right now with active Omicron COVID-19 infections, having a few thousand unvaccinated truckers who could be required, for example, to take a negative rapid test, traveling and largely working out of the isolation of their cabs is not a public health issue in the context of Omicron. All it did is to put more stress on supply chains, on food inflation, and ultimately it was a provocation. It was empty political theater by the Trudeau government. It's created a provocation. I don't justify the law breaking for 1 second, but And I would just point out to those at the Coots border that their Alberta government has been fighting both in Washington and with Ottawa to extend the exemption on the vaccine requirement for international truckers. And now we have Ottawa even talking about applying that interprovincially, which would, I think, be even more ridiculous and completely unenforceable.
Right.
I make no apology for taking that position. Doesn't mean I agree for 1 second with the illegal tactics of some of these protesters.
But Premier, you're a law and order guy, right? I mean, what do you make of the fact that some of your former colleagues and members of the Federal Conservative Caucus have been posing with and encouraging what the Premier of Ontario calls the siege of Ottawa as of today, that they've been there? I mean, is this the sort of behavior that is acceptable for national political leaders to be engaging in?
I think any legislator, that is to say lawmaker, has to support the consistent application of the rule of law. And, you can sympathize with certain messages. I certainly sympathize with the huge frustration of Canadians generally, and these protesters in particular, with 2 years of their lives being disrupted by COVID and COVID restrictions. I get the anger, I get the frustration, but we can never accept lawlessness as a response. And I would hope that people right across the political spectrum understand this point. I would say to what you call law and order, people with a law and order disposition, that if they in any way justify these kinds of protests, then how in the world can they oppose extremists camping out in front of pipelines or creating barriers on railways? So the rule of law has to be applied consistently, regardless of the ostensible reason for the protest.
You mentioned the frustration that is evident in this and that people have 2 years into this pandemic. You're ending most of the public health measures brought in to deal with COVID, some of them quite quickly and others phased in over a period of time. How much did these protests and that sentiment of anger that we're seeing play into your decision-making on this?
Well, the protests, not at all. We are doing this because we believe that we cannot maintain restrictions on people's lives for 1 day longer than is absolutely necessary to protect the healthcare system. We are operating at 87% of our capacity in our acute care system and about the same in ICUs, which is actually below where we have often been at this time of year in pre-COVID years. 40% of the COVID patients in hospital are incidental cases, not being treated for COVID. We're now 3 weeks past our Omicron peak. The positivity rate, daily new case rate, total active cases, wastewater data, hospitalizations, all coming down. And so we lifted all measures on kids because they paid a disproportionate share of the burden over the past 2 years, and the mental health outcomes are clear. Secondly, we eliminated the proof of vaccination program because it no longer serves a defensible public health purpose. We got our vaccinations rates up in the fall, but they've been frozen for about 7 weeks. So
right.
It's not pushing up the vax rates. And secondly, we don't have the same issue of unvaccinated people with higher levels of transmission and infection as we did in the fall. Now, true, the vaccines are very helpful to prevent severe outcomes, but a policy designed to reduce transmission from unvaccinated people no longer makes any scientific sense. Even Dr. Tam has said provinces should reconsider that.
Right. But, there are a lot of people in your province who do not agree with this position. We've seen the Calgary Chamber of Commerce say that taking away the vaccine passport will hurt consumer confidence and potentially cause labor shortages. The Alberta Hospital Association said it would have rather seen liquor curfew and table capacity limits lifted before the vaccine passport. And you've got the Edmonton School Board, which said they weren't consulted on getting rid of the mask mandate, for example, in all schools, and would have preferred a slower approach on this. So why didn't you consult with these groups and take those concerns into account?
Well, it's hardly a surprise that everybody and every organization has an opinion on the optimal COVID policy, but I don't think any government has been able to make these real-time decisions, balancing complex interests. This is not like conventional policy formulation. We have very clear parameters that our COVID policy in Alberta is designed to use restrictions as only a last and limited resort, only when absolutely necessary to prevent an overwhelming of the healthcare system. And secondly, we have sought to minimize the damaging effect of restrictions on people. Now, Some of that, some of those principles are a judgment call. I believe the majority of Albertans have supported a balanced approach. In the case of, for example, bar and restaurant owners who wanted all of the measures lifted immediately, of course they do. I understand that. But the proof of vaccination program was giving us no measurable public health benefit, but reducing serving times, for example, does help us to reduce transmission in higher risk settings. So now that's only going to be in place probably for 3 weeks, and we will lift the vast majority of measures around March the 1st if we continue to see a decline in hospitalizations.
But Premier, you mentioned kids and the mental health impacts. And look, I've got 2 boys, 8 and 5. They go to school every day here in Ottawa wearing masks. But you're removing the mask mandate in schools, and school boards are not going to be allowed to set their own policies on this. So you say this is a judgment call. Why not let school boards have the right to make that judgment call, given where vaccination rates are for young school-age kids and the fact that they're not adults, right? They're not equipped to make the choices the way grown-ups are. So why not let the school boards make that call?
Well, the province is responsible for public health policy, not the school boards, first of all. Secondly, kids have paid a disproportionate burden of COVID restrictions for 2 years. The impact on them has been real, measurable. The data is mounting on that. And thirdly, kids are at the lowest risk of any group of the population for severe outcomes from COVID-19. So we didn't want the mask to become a political football where school board officials are improvising their own public health policy when it's not their proper jurisdiction. We want clarity, simplicity on this point. And, you know, if parents want their kids to wear masks, they can ask them to. If parents think the schools are not safe, they are safe, by the way. I think I have only 6 on online learning out of 2,400 schools in Alberta right now. But if parents have a much higher risk or much lower risk tolerance, or perhaps kids who are immunocompromised, we have very strong support for at-home instruction.
You know, Premier, I remember watching you last year when you said Alberta was open for summer and talking about the best summer ever, and you ended up in a really rough situation in your hospitals right near the eve of the federal election day. I mean, how confident are you that this isn't going to be a repeat of what happened last year?
Well, very confident. First of all, Omicron is, as you know, far less severe than Delta. Secondly, in August, we were at about a 78%, well, let's put it this way, 68% second dose coverage. We're now at 87% amongst the 12 plus population. And so radically higher vaccination rates and wider spread population immunity. Obviously, Omicron has helped many people develop antibodies on top of the vaccine. So we are in a totally different situation. We now have antiviral drugs coming on stream. We know about better treatments. There's wider availability of rapid tests. But at the end of the day, we are 2 years into this. We simply have to change our tactics as the disease changes, and we cannot make those extraordinary measures that have caused so much damage become a permanent feature of our lives. We believe it is. We know we have the situation. The pressures on the hospital is real. Yeah. But it is overall manageable. The numbers are coming down. I cannot guarantee 100% that in the future we might not face a radically more severe variant. We'll have to address that if it happens. But historically, Spanish flu, Hong Kong flu, and other contagious respiratory viruses have shown that they gradually move into endemicity, and I think we have every reason to believe that will happen here.
Okay, Premier Jason Kenney, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.